How's it going, guys? Back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about something that was sparked by a community member, Bruno Scali. You sent me a message on Instagram talking about how you just can't get comfortable with the flash on the Z6 and you're having some problems kind of just working with it. And this is a common problem, so I wanted to make a video talking about it. Couple things though. I'm going to jump over to the Atomos and some like behind the scenes stuff, so I'm going to give you guys a better idea, but I want to talk about a few points. So since the firmware 3.0 upgrade on this thing, the Z6, it is a different, it's gone up another level in autofocus, okay? And particularly the IAF is great. It seems like it's all around a more intelligent system. I did make a video on that. I'm sure you guys have seen it. And but the other thing that not a lot of people have been talking, or nobody's really been talking about since the upgrade, is the D8 setting, the apply settings to live view. Now, if you guys don't know what this does, basically this is the setting that allows whatever camera settings, when you dial in your exposure, what you see is what you get on the screen. Okay, so if you dial in at, you know, 100th of a second, f1.8, and, you know, ISO 100, whatever you are going to get for a picture, you're also going to see in the EVF in the back screen. So that's obviously a huge advantage to mirrorless. It's why a lot of people move to mirrorless. They want to see their exposure right on the screen. Now you can turn this setting off in your menu settings, and there's some reports and people saying that it did improve the autofocus performance if you shut that off. Now, mirrorless cameras in general, I'm not a mirrorless camera engineer, but from my experience, the way that it autofocuses and displays on the live view, it does have some effect in autofocus performance. So, you know, just as a backstory, like we've had these Z6s from the beginning, right when they were first released, and we've pretty much always shot with the D8 setting on. So we've been looking through our viewfinders and we know we're dialing in exposure based on what we see, and you know, we've always shot with it on. There have been some times when the exposure gets really low that it does hunt back and forth, you know, and that was just kind of something that we worked with the Z6. You know, if it's almost dark, you got to turn off that D8 setting, so everything just brightens up and then it can focus in on it easily. Now, another thing that nobody talks about, instead of turning off the D8 setting, what you can do is you can just, say you're shooting continuous, well, if you have your low light autofocused menu setting on, which I'll show you when we flip to the Atomos, if you just flip to, if you're in continuous, you flip to single shot real quick, you can focus in that way. It brightens everything up for a second, grabs focus, and then goes back to your normal exposure. So there's a couple ways to work around that. But since the firmware 3.0 update, you can basically focus in the dark. You can focus on things that are barely visible with this. And I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to prove it. So, man, this is such a huge deal because when you're working with flash, you really want to have that D8 setting on, because the thing is when you turn off your flash, you just have it mounted on the hot shoe, but the flash is off. You can turn on your camera, dial in the exposure based on what you see in the EVF or the back screen, get your ambient set, then just flip on your flash real quick, and then start shooting. Yes, everything's going to brighten up on the screen as soon as you turn on your flash, but it allows you to autofocus in way faster, you know, and all you need to do if you want to change your ambient exposure, flip off the flash real quick, your screen goes back to the correct exposure, and then you can dial it in. So I just wanted to explain this improvement of the D8 setting because there's controversy on it. A lot of people were having issues when they first got theirs, and it seemed like it was more Z7 users. I don't know if there's a difference, but it did, from the reviews I saw online, it seemed like it was more Z7 users. So now, you know, with this new firmware upgrade, you can just leave D8 on. It's going to focus in on basically extremely low light, and if you even have a problem with that, flip in to single point focus real quick. It brightens up, grabs focus, and then you know what you're on. So I'm going to jump over to the Atomos. I'm going to hook this up. I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about with these settings and show you the performance, you know, with the D8 setting on, so you guys can actually get a view and see actually how this is performing. It's a lot better. So let's hop over there, and I will come back after just to give a few final thoughts on it too. Let's go, guys. Okay, guys, so let's just do an overview real quick of the D8 setting, or what I was talking about with the D8 setting and the low light autofocus. So basically we have our two targets here. We have the skull's head, and then we have the microphone right here. Okay, so these are the two things that we're going to be using to focus in and out from. This microphone is about 2 feet in front of the skull, so we can have some good separation. And we're using the 28 1.4 G lens. Okay, we're not using an S lens. S lenses always have better performance than the G lenses, so I'm just using something that technically should be less performing, but as you'll see, it's really not. So let's go into our settings, hit the menu button, and then what we're going to do is go into our pencil, and then go down to shooting display, and then if you go down to D8, this is the setting that we want to leave on. Apply settings to live view. Now when this is on, basically what it's going to do is you're going to be able to see whatever your exposure is exactly how it's going to look in the final images. So if we go back, so since this setting is on, I can change my exposure, and whatever I dial in is the final image that I'm going to get, okay? So obviously we want to leave this D8 setting on if we can, because it's super helpful to not have to rely just on the meter like an old DSLR. We're moving into the future here with mirrorless. We want to be able to dial in our exposure basically just with what we see. But what was happening before, and like I said, I think this was mostly a Z7 problem because we didn't notice this a lot on our Z6. But what was happening is when somebody dialed down their exposure a lot and it was really, really dark like that, below like f5, and you know, people were reporting problems from like f5 to like f11. But if you're dialing it and you can barely see, then it would start to hunt and you couldn't get focus at all. Okay, so what people were doing is going back in and turning that D8 setting off. And so it was just like a DSLR. Everything was bright on the screen. You'd be able to focus, but your ambient exposure or your exposure on the screen is not the same that you would get in the final image. So obviously we want to leave that on. So right now, if it goes low, people were having issues, okay? Now, this is the difference here, guys. Obviously, it's very dark. You can barely see this. So if I'm trying to focus on something, I know it's already in focus in the skull because that was the last thing I focused on. Let's go over here to the microphone. Hit the back button focus one time, and let's brighten it up and check that. Brighten it up, zoom in, and look at that, right in focus. Go back to the skull. You can see the skull is out of focus here. Let's go darken it down. We'll go back to f7.1 so we can barely see it. Hit the back button focus, brighten it up. Look at that, right in focus, guys. So I mean, you can now, after this firmware 3 update, you can basically focus in the dark. Back to the microphone, lighten it up, zoom in to check, it's in focus. Okay, dark again, focus in, lighten up, looks great. So that's pretty amazing there. Now, the other thing that I was saying is if you're still having problems in AFC and you're trying to focus in on something when it's dark and it's hunting and you can't get it, another workaround is instead of going back into your settings and turning off the D8, apply settings to live view, all you have to do is just roll in to single shot focus right here. And as long as you have your low light autofocus set, it's going to flicker. It's going to brighten up just enough so it can acquire focus and then go back to your normal exposure. So my normal exposure is dark right here. I'm in the single shot. If I have low light autofocus on, it's just going to grab it real quick, lighten up. If I go, same thing, if I go over to the microphone, lightens up real quick, grabs it, turns off. Lightens up real quick, grabs it, turns off. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And then all you have to do is just roll back into AFC and, you know, you're back into your AFC mode. So that kind of shows you that this firmware 3, not only did it improve face tracking and the hit rate, but also your low light autofocus to a huge degree. Okay, so that's that. Now let's talk about flash. So in order to wrap your head around the workflow and how we work with this is how we do it. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to mount our flash on the hot shoe first, okay? And we're going to keep it off. So as long as your flash or your trigger is mounted on the hot shoe and it's off, you can still dial in your ambient exposure and you can see what you're about to get, okay? But as soon as you turn on your flash, it's gonna lighten up. So basically what it's doing is it's doing the exact same thing as turning D8 off as soon as you turn your flash on. Because if I turn off my flash, it goes back to ambient exposure and I can dial in. But as soon as I turn on my flash, it lightens up, and then no matter what I do for my ambient exposure, it's always going to stay the same on the screen. But if I need to adjust my ambient exposure, just shut off the flash, adjust my ambient, turn back on my flash, take a shot, pretty good. That's how easy it is. So no matter if we're using on-camera flash or if we're using a trigger for off-camera flash, we mount our trigger and our flash, whatever we're using, turn it off, get the correct exposure dialed in, correct ambient exposure, okay? Then we turn on our flash, then we start shooting. Shut off my flash, and then I'm back. All I have to do is just change my ambient exposure, and I can turn my flash back on, and then I get what, I can start shooting again, whatever I need. So that's how easy it is, guys, just to switch between flash and dialing in your ambient and mixing it with your flash. That's the main thing that I wanted to get through with this, and how you want to wrap your head around mirrorless flash work. You really want to mount your flash or your trigger, turn it off, dial in your ambient however you want it, and then turn on your flash and then start shooting with the flash. I hope that makes sense, guys. And the other thing I wanted to show you also, if we go back in the menu, is the low light autofocus. I believe it's in the A, yeah, right here, A11. So if you go to your pencil and then you go to autofocus A, and then it's A11, low light autofocus. Leave that on, and that's going to allow you to go real dark, with something. If you go into single point, it'll automatically lighten it up real quick just to grab it. Make sense? Hopefully it does. Let's jump back over. I have a few other things I want to say about this, and yeah, hopefully this was helpful. All right, guys, we're back, and I hope that was helpful and it made sense. It wasn't an in-depth flash, tutorial on how to make your portraits look good or anything like that. It's simply an operational perspective and a way to think about using flash so you guys can go out and practice. I've said this a million times. Lighting comes down to practice. Everybody wants to follow a formula. Turn on your camera, put it on this settings, put your flash here, put on this settings, and you can get the same photo every single time. That's not how it works, unfortunately. It's all practice over and over and over again. The important thing is you get your mind wrapped around the operational aspect of the theory behind when to turn it on, when to dial in your exposure, and how to work it like that, and then just go out and practice. The way that we do it with these cameras, and we've found that this is the most fast and easy way, we're turning on and off our triggers and our flashes all the time. Usually at a wedding, a trigger is mounted. I don't do a lot of on-camera flash, I do a lot of off-camera flash. So normally a trigger is mounted from the beginning of the day. When I do getting ready stuff at 10 a.m. I show up, I still have a trigger just mounted on there. So whenever I need to pull out a flash to do some cool off-camera stuff, I just turn on my camera, dial in the ambient exposure, flip on my trigger, take a test shot. If it's not right, I turn off my flash trigger, dial in another ambient, turn it on, take another test shot. So we're turning off and on our flash and our triggers all the time to be able to switch between seeing our exposure in camera and dialing in our ambient and then turning it on to take a shot. And that's really how we do it. And I would advise you guys to do it the same way, and then just go out there and practice. Start shooting photos, start putting on the trigger on the flash, turning it off and on, dialing your ambient, turning it back on, taking a shot, and just switching things up and kind of experimenting and seeing. That's the only way that you're going to get really good at lighting. You just practice. That's it, guys. So this is how we operate it, and I hope this helped. Also, what about, holy crap, that the D8 setting and how this camera focuses and extreme low light nowadays, I think is absolutely phenomenal. Nikon is just, man, they just keep getting better with these updates. I mean, hopefully they'll bring even some more updates out, but man, I feel like we've gotten enough so far. So I'm very happy with it. So as always, I hope this was helpful. Leave it in the comments. You guys have any questions on anything? I'm sure there'll be questions on this stuff. I'm always here to help. So until the next video, my friends.